Ludwig van Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, the Pastoral Symphony, was composed between 1807 and 1808, and was first performed in Vienna in the latter year. Beethoven gave it the subtitle Recollections of Country Life, and also provided each movement with a title, several of them similar to the ones that Disney and his artists later chose for the action they imagined for the music. Awakening of pleasant feelings upon arriving in the country, allegro ma non troppo, is Mount Olympus in Fantasia. The countryside of Beethoven's fancy becomes the Elysian fields at the foot of Mount Olympus, home of the Greek gods. The pleasant feelings are awakened in creatures of mythology, mischievous fawns, baby unicorns, and winged horses. Much of the movement is concerned with the playful flying and swimming of Pegasus, the black-winged stallion, his snow-white mate, and their four foals, including baby Pegasus. Scene by the brook, Andante molto mosso, becomes centaurs and centaurettes, the latter a name Disney coined for the female centaurs, but the brook remains. Beethoven wrote musical suggestions of a peaceful brook rippling over stones and the growling of a thunderstorm, and Disney pictures both. By the brook, the centaurettes amuse themselves fashioning hats out of flowers, bark, and doves, and it is here that they are courted by a band of husky centaurs. The movement ends with winged cupids piping a sad and lonely centaur into the presence of Melinda, clearly the centaurette of his dreams. Peasants' merrymaking, allegro, becomes bacchanal. The merrymakers here are Bacchus, the god of wine, who rides tipsily out of the farce on his donkey unicorn, Jackus, and all the mythological creatures who join him in the bacchanal, they pressing wine from grapes, he drinking it, and cavorting. The storm, allegro, states just that. In Disney's storm, the sky darkens, rain begins to fall, and a bearded Zeus appears in the clouds above the revelers. He takes lightning bolts forged by Vulcan and hurls them at Bacchus, finally shattering the wine vat and causing a flood of wine. Then, tiring of the sport, Zeus lies down in the clouds to sleep, folding it around him like a blanket. Shepherd's hymn of thanksgiving after the storm, Allegretto, becomes simply sunset. After the storm, Iris floats across the sky, trailing her rainbow behind her. Pan, Cupid, and baby Pegasus play in the rainbow's colors. Apollo rides his chariot of the sun, driving 3 great horses, waving to the merrymakers, who wave back thankfully for the lovely day now ending. Morpheus brings on the night sky as he crosses the horizon. Diana grasps the new moon as if it were a bow, and fires a comet that scatters stars. The stars fall into their places in the night sky, and the camera trucks back to show the Elysian fields and Mount Olympus, the current towering podium shape, at peace under the moon and the stars. F. Scott Fitzgerald described guests who came to Gatsby's parties with a simplicity of heart that was its own ticket of admission. That was the way Walt Disney approached art's portals. Perhaps Bach and Beethoven are strange bedfellows for Mickey Mouse, he wrote, but it's all been a lot of fun, and I want to thank Leopold Stokowski, Deems Taylor, and all my co-workers for holding my head up when the water got too deep. The cultural waters were deepest in the short film animated to Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony. It was the most widely criticized selection on the Fantasia program, the consensus being that the visual complement was not worthy of the spirit of the music. An even more fundamental criticism, however, was that such music as the Pastoral Symphony should not have any visual complement at all. George Balanchine, the New York City Ballet's longtime choreographer and artistic director, once told why some music is not co-expressible with visual action. In listening to composers like Beethoven and Brahms, every listener has his own ideas, paints his own picture of what the music represents. Beethoven did not have this in mind, I am sure, but he does seem to be painting a picture, and people like to put themselves in that picture. Now how can I, a choreographer, try to squeeze a dancing body into a picture that already exists in somebody's mind? It simply won't work. The ironic thing, however, is that the Disney artist did not originally plan Fantasia's mythological segment with the Pastoral Symphony in mind. The music originally chosen to go with their animations of fawns and centaurs and flying horses was Pierne's Cydalise. Walt loved the story continuity that was developing in the story sketches he saw at meetings with his artists, and he particularly admired the sketches of the flying horses. But the Pierne music didn't seem to be working well with these images. And so, at the story meeting on November 2nd, 1938, we find Disney's decision to abandon the Pierne piece and search for some other music. "I think that is marvelous," said Walt, looking at a sketch of Pegasus. "The way the horse comes down, with his feet out, and lands in the water. When he lands, I would like to see those wings fold like a swan's." Walt had now found the reference point in reality that is behind all good animated fantasy. When the flying horses swim in the water, they will fold their wings like swans. As he so often did, Disney provided his artists with a visual clue, which they quickly proceeded to develop. Dick Huemer, one of Fantasia's two story directors, who ultimately suggested using the Pastoral Symphony, was now following the line of Walt's thinking. If a flying horse folds its wings like a swan, mightn't it also put its head underwater like a swan? "You mean the way the bird does with his beak?" asked Huemer, after consulting his visual memory. "They bite themselves too, like they have fleas." "Horses don't have fleas," said Walt flatly. "They bite at flies." Whenever he was discussing the animation of animals, his mind went back to the farm animals he observed in Marceline, Missouri, when he was between 5 and 9 years old, and his recall, said his associates, was nearly total. And now Walt's imagination was blossoming. A very effective thing as they swim along is to keep the horse's tail swimming, one tail floating on the water, like hair. Suddenly, Walt thought that they had enough of this sequence. "I think that stuff is new enough, fresh enough to an audience that it would be good not to overcrowd it with business." But Walt Disney had a far bigger problem with Fantasia's venture into mythology, though he didn't bring it up at that meeting until he had approved most of the action that had been designed for the sequence. The thing I keep thinking about too, the material is so damn good in here, I wonder if we couldn't make it our own conglomeration. Realizing that Walt was dissatisfied with the music, Joe Grant admitted that it was hampering for development of the story. "Every time we get going with some ideas, we have to stop." That was the cue for Walt to say flatly what he was thinking. "This music is not so hot to me. We should find music to fit the things we have in mind here, but good music." At that point, Huemer suggested that Disney hire Stravinsky, or this man Pierne, to write some original music for the mythological section. "No, I don't think that would work, Dick," said Walt. "Those guys don't work that way." "They don't care about timing," said Huemer, meaning apparently that composers with a background of a Stravinsky would not be aware of the timing problems that an animator faces in fitting visible action to music. "They are of another school, said Disney. "We are developing an entirely different school right here in this place." By the close of the meeting, Walt Disney had definitely decided to use some music other than Pierne's Cydalise for the Greek mythology number that he was beginning to like very much. "Let's do some exploring first," he said. "Let's see if we can put together the right stuff." But he warned that if they couldn't find music with the right class, he would have to delay work on the mythology section. By the following February, a storyman named George Stallings had typed up a brief continuity for the third, fourth, and fifth movements of the Pastoral Symphony. It contained suggestions for some of the most effective animated images in the finished work. There is the thunderous dancing by Bacchus, which stimulates the build-up into a flurry of wild frolicking. Centaurs and girls, not yet Centaurettes, dancing about with much vim and gusto. It seems a pity that Disney didn't commission an original composition to accompany his mythological ballet, as Diaghilev would have. The picturization of characters and incidents from Greek mythology has attracted artists from Titian to Picasso and includes many themes that are particularly well suited to animated drawing, but the subject deserved an original score tailored to its music and rhythmic requirements as well. We find Pegasus on a vase made in the 4th century BC, and he has appeared in many paintings since. But the Disney artists were the first to depict winged horses actually flying. Theirs was the problem of showing whether such beasts landed front legs first or hind legs first, and how their powerful wings might have moved. 40 years later, Ray Harryhausen, the leading animator of three-dimensional models, put a flying horse into his 1981 MGM film, Clash of the Titans, and he acknowledged his debt to Disney. The question with Pegasus was, what do you do with 4 legs when you have glorious wings to keep you up? I thought of Disney's Fantasia instantly, and in my early experiments, I tried to animate graceful horses with their languid legs making beautiful designs in the air, and it just didn't work. A cartoon animator moving stylized characters against stylized backgrounds has much more flexibility. In the Pastoral Symphony, this flexibility resulted in animation by Erik Larson, Don Tousley, and others that flows well and has, for the most part, a pleasing rhythmic pattern. Disney had experimented with the animation of the faun since his 1930s silly symphony, Playful Pan. In the Pastoral Symphony, animator Walt Kelly, who was later to achieve fame as the creator of the comic strip Pogo, animated fawns with the tail and hind legs of a goat, small horns, and pointed ears. In the paintings of Pinturicchio and others, the faun is shown playing the syrinx, or pipes of Pan. In the animation of Disney, the fawns frisk, goat-like, while piping like humans, as they might in our fantasies. The centaurs are Fantasia's nadir. Master animator Erik Larson, who did not work on them, says that they were not pleasing forms to begin with, and they seemed clumsy in action. The great animator Bill Tytla has evaluated Winsor McKay's The Centaurs and Captain Grogg, among other strange creatures, by the Swedish animator Victor Bergdahl. Tytla was of the opinion that both these films had centaurs superior in design, draftsmanship, and animation to the centaurs in the Pastoral Symphony. I remember how badly I wanted to do them at the time, said Tytla. Then I got a call from Walt, and he wanted me to do Night on Bald Mountain. When I saw the centaurs in the picture, they looked gutless. They should have been big stallions with dark Mediterranean faces on them. Instead, they were castrated horses with a type of Anglo-Saxon head. I was a polo player. I liked to be around horses. I could have done good things with them. It's what you do with what you got, Disney said frequently. He apparently believed that Fantasia needed Tytla's artistry more for animating the devil on Bald Mountain, and he was certainly right, for that is Fantasia's highest peak. Yet Tytla may have been the only artist on the Disney staff capable of both drawing and animating the centaurs as they should have been done. Freddie Moore consistently created charming and appealing animation, but he was miscast as animation supervisor of the symphony's second movement, the one in which the centaurs romance Centaurettes. Both centaurs and Centaurettes moved clumsily at times, and the centaurs were sometimes effeminate in their movements. The Centaurettes presented another problem. As drawn, they didn't fit in ancient Greek and or mythological setting. Their upper torsos belonged to what was known around the Disney studio as Freddie Moore girls, typically American nubile adolescents who are now called Lolitas in honor of the eponymous heroine of Nabokov's famous novel. The lower torsos were horses. Moore and his former assistant, Oliver M. Johnston Jr., drew and animated the girl part easily and well. As no less an authority than the great British caricaturist Sir David Lowe remarked, compare the play of human expression in the face of Snow White with that in the faces of the Centaurettes in Fantasia, and mark the striking improvement. Subtlety is now possible. This subtlety of expression is best seen in the Centaurette fashion show, as when a Centaurette tries on 2 doves for a hat in an attempt to please Cupid. But the girls look as out of place on Mount Olympus as Lana Turner would have looked playing Greek comedy. The Freddie Moore girls belong in an American high school setting, which is how they are used later to good effect. When they dance to Benny Goodman's recording of All the Cats Join In Disney's 1946 pop cartoon, Make Mine Music. The winged cupids, who piped an entranced centaur into a romance with a centaurette, also give us a picture of the way Disney solved problems at the time Fantasia was in production. One day, Otto Englander burst into Walt's office with an idea for ending the first movement of the Pastoral Symphony. Englander found Walt seated on the floor of his office amid a clutter of chromium tubes and blue leatherette cushions. Walt explained sheepishly that he was considering a new design for an animator's chair, and he was taking it apart to see how it was constructed. Walt listened as Englander explained his idea, approved it, and returned to his dissection of the chair. Bob Thomas, Disney's biographer, tells this anecdote. Englander's idea was to have the 3 cupids who have brought the centaur and the centaurette together draw a curtain on their activities. As it now appears on the screen, 2 of the cupids fly off. The last one looks to the right, then to the left, and flies over to part the curtains and peek inside. Cupid, as a naked winged baby boy with a rosy bottom, has been an artistic convention at least since Cupid held a mirror for Venus in Velazquez's 17th century masterpiece, The Toilet of Venus. But, this being animation, his rosy bottom metamorphoses into a heart to symbolize the love scene that he is witnessing. The third movement, Bacchanal in the Disney version, is the country dance that Beethoven wrote for the scherzo. It is performed with gusto by fauns and cupids, centaurs and centaurettes, frolicking in a harvest festival in honor of Bacchus, god of the vine. Disney's Bacchus is not the curly-haired youth of Roman art, but a fat and tipsy wine god who rides his unicorn jackass with a roll-licking movement that is the essence of drunken revelry. Ward Kimball was the animation supervisor for the Bacchanalian bits, and they have Kimball's freewheeling zest. When the donkey swallows wine, then smacks his lips and hiccups, that is pure gimbal. We can also see the animation of Walt Kelly, a member of the gimbal unit, in his section. The storm with which Beethoven interrupted his jolly gathering of country folk is interpreted by the Disney artists as a storm made by Vulcan, blacksmith of the gods, who forges giant thunderbolts for Zeus to throw. Of the 5 parts of the Pastoral Symphony, this 4th movement, co-directed by Ham Lusk and Jim Handley, with art direction by Ken Anderson, is most successful at expressing Beethoven's music in animated images. Zeus and Vulcan are very well animated by Art Babbitt, though they are not beautifully drawn. To compare the original character designs, or even the storyboard sketches, with Babbitt's animation, is to see that his background as a cartoonist had ill-prepared him to draw human figures of classical proportions. Babbitt said that when he got the assignment from Disney, he took a crash course in drawing the human figure under Don Graham at the Disney Training School. It was not enough. The face of Babbitt's Vulcan is a cartoon convention, right to his cherry nose. And the Art Deco design of Zeus, complete with scalloped beard, often loses its strength in animation. The movement, however, has the qualities that always distinguish Babbitt's animation: the weight and rhythmic timing in Vulcan's resounding hammer blows, the surprising use of a commonplace action carefully analyzed as Zeus yawns, kicks off both his slippers, and pulls clouds over himself as if they were bedclothes after he has tossed away his last lightning bolt. Vulcan at his forge has been pictured by such artists as Bruegel the Elder. Vulcan in action, hammering at his forge, had to wait for the artists at the Disney studio. In the days when Fantasia was being made, whole sequences would be color-keyed, scene by scene, so that the colors in each shot would harmonize not only with each other, but with the colors in the preceding and following shots, and would be keyed as well to the changes in the emotions being expressed by the actions. Before the narrative pattern was completed in any great detail, wrote Harvard professor Robert D. Feild in his seminal 1942 study, The Art of Walt Disney, an overall color scheme was worked out in sympathy with the general mood of the music and pattern to correspond with the development of the subject matter. Ken Anderson, the art director who color-keyed the storm in the Pastoral Symphony, painted a color scheme chart that was designed to show the background painters what colors they should use to express Bacchus's fear as he gets lightning bolts thrown at him, or the relief of the characters emerging from shelter after the storm. The formalized landscapes for the Pastoral Symphony were the boldest yet seen in an animated feature. Disney was the first to realize, wrote Louis Jacobs, that color in motion pictures need not bear any resemblance to color in real life, that objects on the screen could be endowed with any pigmentation dictated by the imagination. Forms could be suggested rather than realistically presented. The texture of the paint itself could be used to express the texture of the object painted. In Disney's Arcadia, the leaves of a tree could be, and were, boysenberry as easily as green. All that was necessary was that those who saw them should say, or at least feel, "I too have lived in Arcadia." Indeed, the way that the Pastoral Symphony got boysenberry trees, as reported in the Disney Studio house organ, shows how deliciously experimental Fantasia really was. Baffled in his search for a new and different color for a Hugh Hennessy layout, and having tried everything on the palette, Ray Huffine sulked in his room during the lunch hour. In the course of going through a home-packed lunch which contained, among other items, a jar of Mrs. Huffine's best boysenberry jam, Huffine is reported to have done a classic double-take, then to have reached for the jar, and laid a delicate boysenberry wash over the background. Results were strangely satisfactory, and, disguised as a background, Mrs. Huffine's Boysenberry premiered middle of the week in New York.
Boysenberry!
Shepherd's Hymn of Thanksgiving After the Storm, Allegretto, was a designation Beethoven gave to the fifth and last movement of his Pastoral Symphony. This movement was used by Disney for the animation of a sunset after the storm, in which a number of Greek gods are brought to life to perform their most characteristic actions. The artists at the Disney studio used the paints on their palettes in consonance with the colors of Beethoven's musical tones. What they came up with was the fulfillment of Disney's enthusiastic cry when he first saw a 3-strip Technicolor back in 1932. "At last! We can show a rainbow on the screen!" Apollo, the god of light, drives his fiery chariot drawn by 3 golden horses, the embodiment of the setting sun, in an image as memorable as the castle in the setting sun in Snow White. "You know, fellows," said Disney in urging his artists to make that sun shine, "this will probably be the first and last time the public is ever going to see the sun, so let 'em have it. Burn up the screen with that color." It is in the Pastoral Symphony, more than in any other of his works, that Disney's reach exceeds his grasp, and yet, what he is grasping at is the basic right of animation as the youngest of the arts. The right to treat of the great mythological themes which have attracted artists from the anonymous painters of antiquity to Picasso.